Hi, we are film experts from the University of Adelaide, and we are here to talk about the Academy Awards 2024. So, what are our general takeaways? What did we enjoy? What was most interesting about the ceremony this year?
Well, for me, I was a little bit disappointed because the way that the Oscars works these days is that very often the winners, we know the winners really months in advance, right? Back in the day, there was perhaps a bit of suspense about who was going to win, and there was perhaps, a shock on the night when an envelope was opened and the name that you weren't expecting was read out. I just think with the way that awards seasons work these days, I think everybody pretty much knew that Oppenheimer was going to not exactly sweep the boards, but certainly get most of the big prizes. So that's perhaps something that the Academy Awards needs to think about, I suppose, is that how do they keep that excitement and that tension? Now, there were some surprises on the night, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I guess for me, going forward, how do we try to not coronate a film or a set of films 6 months out? How do we actually keep that excitement going until the very last moments of the night?
Yeah, I felt the ceremony itself, I thought, was much an improvement on previous years. Last year's was a train wreck.
Yes.
So actually, a couple of years before that as well, including one held in a train station or whatever it was.
Yep.
Yes.
But I thought it flowed a lot better, and so in that sense, it was interesting to watch. But as you say, perhaps not terribly many surprises that caught us off guard or did anything like that. But yeah,
it did make me wonder if they had new writers, because it seemed like a bit more of a fun, interesting, sort of structured ceremony.
Yep.
This time there was some fun little bits. I mean, as Ben said, ultimately the winners are kind of already known before the ceremony, so it kind of, for the telecast to be interesting, there has to be that kind of like spontaneity. And I mean, obviously we don't want people to get slapped every year, and we don't want the wrong film to be announced every year, but like those things are what makes it worth watching.
Yeah, and look, to Peter's point as well, for a long time, the ceremony was often criticised for being too long, right? It kind of dragged. There were all these kind of edited pieces. There was sort of monologues that didn't really land particularly well. I think to both of your points, it was a lot tighter. It was a lot faster this year. It was edited kind of really well, and I think in fact I think it may even have been on the short side, because they were kind of almost looking to fill stuff at the end. Jimmy Kimmel felt a little bit kind of, we've sort of reached the end and we haven't gone over, right?
Yeah, it was 5 minutes short, even though it started 5 minutes late.
That's right. So that never happened.
So it was 10 minutes short.
That's right. So I think that perhaps they've taken on some of that criticism that we're talking about here, about the train wreck kind of nature of it. It can often get a bit predictable. Maybe that new writing team, Jimmy Kimmel knows what he's doing, obviously, for an audience. I think perhaps that is now starting to bear fruit, and it'd be interesting to see what the viewing figures are, because not a lot of people tune into the Oscars these days.
No.
So whether or not that's been an uptick in audience numbers, we will wait and see.
So what were the shocks? What were the surprises? Was there any?
Peter, do you want to say something about Best Animated Feature? Because I think that was kind of interesting, wasn't it? How that sort of turned out.
Yes. I mean, again, going back to that idea about thinking we know who's going to win, and Spider-Man was obviously, tipped to win that. So to see Miyazaki's film win was great. The cynic in me kind of says, is this kind of a tribute for all of his films rather than necessarily The Boy and the Heron on its own? I think it's kind of a cumulative award in some ways, and of course Miyazaki, didn't show up or didn't take part in any way, which was interesting.
That's right, and neither did Wes Anderson, of course, right? So he wins his first Oscar for a live action short. So it was not seeing him, not seeing Miyazaki was kind of a bit of a shock, because it would have been wonderful to see those two people live. But I guess the big surprise, not really a shock, but the surprise was probably Emma Stone taking it out over Lily Gladstone. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Jess, what that means, going forward.
I think that was a bit of a surprise. I think it sort of probably reflects the kinds of performances that the Oscars like to reward. Emma Stone's performance was quite a big, bombastic performance, whereas Lily Gladstone's performance was a quiet, reserved, more of a sort of intimate portrait of this Osage woman. I think Lily Gladstone's performance was extraordinary. She bent the whole film around her. But she also wasn't on screen for much of the movie. So I think there is a certain politics there. I think Emma Stone's performance is probably a true leading performance, whereas Lily Gladstone maybe would have been more successful in the supporting category, but we won't know.
The one that I thought would have been a surprise would have been if Sandra Hüller had picked it up, because she gave a great performance. Anatomy of a Fall.
And Zone of Interest.
And Zone of Interest, but yes, obviously they went the kind of, I don't want to say the safe Hollywood route, but Emma Stone's performance was fantastic, and I think thoroughly deserved the award. But if they'd taken a risk, it might have been for Sandra Hüller.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one I thought that was quite, maybe not shocking, but interesting was American Fiction, won for Best Adapted Screenplay. So that's Cord Jefferson won his first Oscar. A gay black man sort of won his first Oscar in a film that is really a film about writing, and it's a writer's film. And that was probably the only non-technical award that Barbie may have been really in genuine contention for. So we didn't really see Barbie get up, other than, of course, the musical performances.
But that brings up the controversy about Barbie being an adaptation. It's not an adaptation at all. It's just a franchise toy that they've turned into a story. So that itself was a bit of a misnomer, I think.
Yeah, the Academy's rules around adaptation seem to be very strange.
Yeah, now, look, I know everybody wants us to talk about Ryan Gosling, but we might come back to Ryan and Ken in a moment. But just to Peter's point as well, there's obviously a diversity now with the Oscar membership.
Yep.
And that was a conscious decision, I think, 5 or 10 years ago, to really broaden the demographic, to kind of internationalise the membership. And obviously we're seeing the repercussions of that last night, right? With Miyazaki winning over Spider-Man and Sandra Hüller being nominated. And Godzilla, that's right. Parasite won a few years ago, didn't it? Best Picture, etc. So I think we're seeing now what happens when the Oscars does become much more plural and much more sort of multifaceted in its outlook. Those films that might not necessarily be rewarded or even talked about are actually getting quite close to to mass appeal to a mass audience, and I think that's only a good thing. And I'd be really interested to see going forward what happens next year, because obviously Anatomy of a Fall won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and so it was kind of premiered at Cannes. So perhaps a film that does well at these sort of more niche film festivals, 9 months before the Oscars, often a year before the Oscars, we may actually be talking about them next year as being the ones that the audiences and the members have actually gone out and nominated. Interesting.
Yes. Yep.
So do we have a favourite moment of the Oscars?
Peter.
I was very kind of touched by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, twins back on stage. I thought that was a nice little moment, nice touch.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed hearing John Mulaney describe the plot to Field of Dreams. That was a real highlight for me.
Yes.
And I love the fact that they had previous winners of the acting awards coming on stage and presenting and kind of eulogising the nominees. I thought that was a lovely touch. I am a big fan, as you know, of Nicolas Cage.
Yep.
So any opportunity to see Nicolas Cage just kind of hold the centre of the screen for 20 seconds is always a good thing, in my opinion. But I like that decision that the Academy have made. It kind of senses that they're passing the torch onto the new generation of actors. Cillian Murphy, it's the first time he's won, for example. I really thought that was a kind of tender, heartfelt, but also really kind of interesting way of continuing that continuity with the Academy.
Yeah.
I thought the John Cena bit was good comedy,
comedy,
and often in past shows that the comedy has just fallen dead flat. But I thought that worked nicely. It was good.
Yeah, that worked nicely. I also really liked the actors presenting the awards to the actors. I think it gave a sense of nostalgia and history, which I think, and sort of a sense that we love movies.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the Oscars can be so self-serious that they forget that the reason we're watching is because we really like movies. And everyone in the room really likes movies. And that we should celebrate good movies.
Yeah.
Not quite sure Al Pacino got the memo for that when he came on at the end there. Shambled on a little bit, quite unsure about where he was, and then he kind of didn't even read the name properly. But anyway, what do you reckon about that bit?
I feel like Al Pacino thought he was going to the bar and wandered on stage, because that was such an anticlimactic moment to end the ceremony on.
Yes, and it was uncertainty. Like he kind of said, I see Oppenheimer. And then they kind of all sort of started getting up from their seats. But there was still nothing to confirm it. There was nothing on the screen to say Best Picture or anything like that. So it was kind of, have we got another Moonlight
La La Land. We can't risk getting out of our seats until we're sure.
Yes,
that's right. For me, the biggest disappointment of the night was the in memoriam segment. Where they list all of the actors and the technicians and the folk in the movie industry that have passed away in the previous 12 months. And that is always a ham-fisted effort, I think, by the Academy to eulogise and to memorialise these people, because they have tiny fonts. They had some weird kind of interpretive dance going on while this was happening. So I think that, of course, in a 3.5-hour ceremony, not everything is going to work and not everything is going to land properly. But I think that the way that they commemorate and remember past actors and past technicians, I think they really need to look at that, actually.
They need to look to the Grammys. I think the Grammys consistently do the best job of the in memoriam. They give the people that have passed attention and they give them the reverence they deserve without sort of all this extra sort of clutter.
Yes, it was a distraction watching the dancers and thinking, hang on, I've missed 3 names that have come up.
That's right. So. Yeah, and there's always people they miss out, right, as well, of course. So there's always a bit of a controversy around that. So
So we have to talk about Ken.
Yes, we do.
We do. We have to talk about I'm Just Ken. It was the most anticipated performance of the night. Was Ryan Gosling going to get up on stage and perform Ken? I personally think he didn't disappoint. I think he gave it his all, as did everyone else on stage.
Yes, and great the way that it introduced with him just sitting back in the seat with the hat down over his eyes. And I don't know if you saw Billie Eilish sitting behind, holding her hand over her mouth, trying not to laugh. It was very funny.
No, he's great, and he played along. He often has that reputation for being quite a serious actor, very, very private, doesn't do a great deal of sort of press. He's not a celebrity in the traditional sense. So for him to do that, he sang it live as well, I think. So he's got an amazing singing voice for a live audience like that, and I think that's what people came to see. Barbie, of course, didn't take out as many awards as perhaps it thought. I know, obviously, the Billie Eilish song, her second, by the way, actually. So she's, I think, one of the youngest ever in Oscar history to win 2 awards so early in their career. I think she's still only in her early 20s, right?
She has more Oscars than Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, that's a problem.
That's a problem.
That is a problem. But no, I think Gosling did a great job, and like I said before, that all year, well, certainly since July, the whole of the film industry had this kind of Barbenheimer pivot, between the two, the popular success and the kind of cerebral biopic, right? And so it was great to see them both get their moment in the sun. I thought the little interplay between him and Emily Blunt during the ceremony was great as well. So. I think going forward, I think the movies are in a great shape. I think there was a lot of discussion and distress about where movies was going 2 or 3 years ago, obviously, with streaming and cinemas shutting down and people not going to the movies anymore. But certainly 2023 would suggest that we're eager to get back to the movies.
Yeah, and I think Barbie taking $1.4 billion at the box office. It's not going to if it didn't win Best Picture, it's not going to.
Barbie's fine. It's going to be fine without the Oscar win.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see what Greta Gerwig does next, because she's got already such a great variety in the films that she's made. So
And what do you? Yeah, sorry. What do you think then for the winners? What happens to them now? What happens to Sandra Hüller, for example? What happens to Cillian Murphy? What happens to Christopher Nolan? Even I mean, are we expecting a kind of a pullback? Are we expecting not to hear from Nolan for 3 to 5 years, or do you think this kind of gives him more impetus and momentum now to keep on making these crowd pleasing but also very, very intelligent films?
I wonder if he'll kind of dip back for a moment into more Inception type filmmaking, that he's now made this huge biopic. It's kind of a mainstream, if you like, blockbuster. That I'm sort of hoping that he goes, well, now let me do something a bit more challenging again.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like Gerwig, I think Greta Gerwig kind of can only go in two directions. She can either go another big budget blockbuster, or she goes back and makes another small intimate film like Lady Bird. I personally would love to see her make another, now with all the sort of cultural economic capital that she's amassed within the industry, to actually sort of go and start making these mid-budget $30 million films and sort of reinvigorate that space. I would really like to see people like Alexander Payne and Greta Gerwig and and Wes Anderson funded to make more of those kinds of films than the $100 million films. But that's just me.
Yeah. But that's what Cord Jefferson said, didn't he, in his acceptance speech? Instead of making one $200 million film, why don't we make 10, $20 million movies, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that in the audience you've got the actors, obviously, and the families and everybody involved with the films, but you've also got the executives. You've got the people who actually can dictate and decide the next 5 years, the next 20 years of how Hollywood is going to work, right? Yeah. So if we can move away from not necessarily the superhero film, which often gets sort of beaten over the head, but if we can move away from those huge, massive kind of publicity machines to those much smaller, more intimate films, The Holdovers, Poor Things, Anatomy of a Fall, that's obviously where the talent is and where the audience engagement is, right?
Yeah, and I think even, as you say, Zone of Interest, Past Lives, very small budget film. So, and they were all kind of nominated, which is great. It means that there is an audience out there, and so there might be cause to reflect on that. Let's not put all our eggs in the one basket.
Past Lives may be one of my favourite films, or my favourite film from last year.
Yeah.
I thought it was extraordinary, intimate, low-key filmmaking that sort of just sort of beautifully told this very personal story through the faces of these actors. And I would have loved to have seen it get a little bit more love, but if an Academy Award nomination means more people watch Past Lives, more people watch Zone of Interest, then that's the ideal.
Yeah, and that comes back to the greater internationalisation, I guess, of the films. Now we've got, I think, 3 in the Best Picture nominees were international films, and Past Lives, of course, has a large Korean section. In the past years, we've had Minari, we've had Parasite,
Drive My Car. So a number of films from around the world now getting sort of that great representation. So it's not just about Hollywood. Yeah.
And we can see them more easily as well, right? I mean, in the old days, to see the sorts of films that we've just talked about, you'd have to wait for it to come to an art house cinema often, or some kind of repertory screening. Now we can either see them at, mainstream cinemas or increasingly, right, streaming. I mean, many of the films that we've discussed, we can actually see at home tonight if we so wish. So I think there's a growing visibility of these films, and I think that has meant that we are more open and more susceptible to interesting storytelling. It's storytelling that isn't necessarily following a particular formula or model. We're kind of intrigued by ambiguity. We're intrigued by mystery, suspense. Anatomy of a Fall is a perfect example of that, right? I'm still not sure if she did it or not. I don't know if you've seen the film.
That's right. Yeah.
You're kind of thinking about.
No, I still don't know.
For weeks afterwards. That's right. Did she actually do it? Right.
I don't know if you saw some of the after party footage.
No, I haven't.
Sandra Hüller reenacting beating a guy with her statuette. So maybe that's the answer to the.
Yeah, and I mean that's the strange thing about the current streaming landscape and the current cinema landscape is that, like, something like Poor Things, which is not a mainstream movie, you can put Emma Stone and Mark Ruffalo and Willem Dafoe in this, but it is a bizarre movie. It is very much an art house,
Yes.
odd little ball of a film.
Yeah.
But it's on Disney Plus. It's sitting there next to, like, ABC procedurals. It's sitting there next to Grey's Anatomy. And old, like, Disney movies like The Mighty Ducks. It's an odd moment that we're in.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, to your point, Jess, you know, you've got Killers of the Flower Moon on Apple. That's a $200 million movie, right? Not the kind I think that Cord Jefferson is talking about and calling out in his speech, but the idea that Apple can provide that amount of funding and that amount of clout for Scorsese is perhaps another direction where we may be headed, where, you know, the bigger, more mainstream studios are still going to be reluctant to spend that amount of money on a film that, let's face it, isn't going to make a great deal of money at the box office. But streamers are still providing opportunities. And Apple obviously did Napoleon as well. Amazon did, you know, a whole bunch of really, really interesting stuff this year as well. Poor Things on Disney, etc. It's kind of interesting to see how that funding model and that distribution model will kind of evolve.
Yeah.
So is there anything we've missed?
Were there any awards that you think maybe that wasn't deserved, or maybe that was off the mark, didn't hit the mark?
Well, I'm going to say I'm not a big fan of Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in Oppenheimer. I'm wondering if it was one of those career awards where he's done the hard yards, he played Tony Stark for a decade, he's kind of gone through rehab and a great deal of kind of personal and emotional and problems, and this is kind of his reward for coming out the other side. I'm not a big fan of him as a speech giver. I think it's very much about him. But if we go back to the performances, I think there were 5 performances nominated, and his was perhaps the least deserving. That's just a personal opinion. But I will be interested to see what he does next, because I think now he has got the world at his feet.
I kind of think Robert Downey Jr. always plays Robert Downey Jr.
Right. Yes.
He's a movie star in that really old school sense of a movie star. Like Tom Cruise, you only ever see Tom Cruise, but you're thrilled to see him. He's charismatic. He's great. I kind of think Robert Downey Jr. is in the same category for me. He doesn't transform. I'm not thrilled. I'm like, oh, you know, what a transformative chameleonic experience I just had.
Yes.
I don't know. I think it was a career award. I think it was the industry patting themselves on the back for giving him a second chance.
Yeah. And not to be too hard on Robert Downey Jr., but that was what I had in mind when I asked that question. And I felt at the start of Oppenheimer, I thought he was okay, and I felt the longer the film went on,
and it went on for a long time.
I thought his performance kind of, I don't know, just seemed to wash away, and it seemed like the makeup got worse, and I don't know what happened, but you know, yes, that's probably not my favourite.
I actually kind of forgot he was in it, which is not a good sign.
Yeah, I was disappointed that Mark Ruffalo didn't win that Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, he was very good. Yeah. What about the political nature of the ceremony as well? Did you feel that the speeches were well pitched in that respect? Obviously, Jonathan Glazer won for Zone of Interest. I thought he gave a great speech about the contemporary nature really of what his film is about, and how it's very much part of us, around us today, with Gaza and Israel, etc. Any thoughts on the messages there, or the ideas that were given?
Cillian Murphy also spoke about living in a peaceful world. I think it was very sort of subdued, I guess, in a lot of ways. Obviously, it would have been interesting if Lily Gladstone had won and got up there to make a speech. I think nobody wanted to rock the boat. So even as good as Glazer's speech was, it wasn't, it wasn't, they weren't really harsh words. But, it's great that he raised the point.
Yeah, I think it was ultimately a kind of soft pedal sort of form of politics that we've come to expect from the Oscars and from the Academy. One point I did think was interesting was that they gave an ode to stunt performers.
Yes.
They gave a sort of tribute to stunt performers, which seemed a little bit pandering to me because stunt performers have been lobbying for an award, have been lobbying for some sort of award that recognises the significant contribution that stunt performers play in films. And this kind of seemed like a sort of pat on the back, hand wavy kind of thing, instead of actually addressing their genuine call for a category.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was leading up to her,
So
and
did
now
I.
he's the nominees,
Yeah.
but that didn't happen. Maybe they're afraid that people will try too hard to get a stunt award, like push the envelope a bit.
Tom Cruise or somebody. That's right.
Yes, yeah.
I know that I think there is a new category next year. It's going to be a new Oscar for casting. So, like a collective award. I guess would that be the casting director that would pick that up,
maybe.
I
or,
guess so, yeah.
or something like that? So that will be really, because it's quite rare, isn't it, that the Oscars invent or establish a new award in this way. So
Yes.
an award for casting, you would sort of think, well, any number of the films that we've talked about today could actually have been up for an award for best casting, because a lot of the films were those big kind of network films, lots of different characters, lots of different interactions. Oppenheimer, obviously, but even Barbie, a Zone of Interest to a lesser extent as well. I think would have been really interesting to see how that goes. So.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I'm all for more awards that recognise below the line
Yeah.
sort of workers, particularly in the sort of age of union strikes. I
Yeah,
think it's
which
going to be
they
really
had
important.
that tribute at the start there, which was very good, I thought.